Chapter 10 is long and has lots of information. Probably will be the most important of this whole term that we studied here, because the needs are so different in communications and support than any of the thing else we've talked about. So I felt it's important, but it's a very long lecture, and please stay with me through it all. There's lots of parts, really too much for one chapter. They really should have broken this more, but nonetheless creates awareness about early childhood programs and all the different things that are involved in working with special education. So come along and let's look at working with families with special needs. Chapter 10, Supporting Families of Children with Special Needs. Dr. Rojas Cortez has an additional author on this chapter, also this Dr. Joe Spiedel. As you know, Dr. Berger is the original author and now elderly, so has included others. Respect and empathy, interest, motivation, care, and value create strong partnerships with family of children with special needs. This chapter will stretch you a little because of your knowledge, the things I'm going to ask you to know about the special ed and special education process. And let me just jump over here if I could. That this is going to lay it out a little bit here. Back up here, and here's the beginning. But this is what it looks like here. And there's actually 13 of them here. And I'm going to try and lay these out the best I can throughout the chapter. It's kind of a long chapter, but I'm going to try and mark these very clearly so you can break them into points. And the test questions follow these fairly close. When I go to the textbooks, I'll talk about that a little bit. First is the influences for the need of special ed. And this is what I'm doing here is I'm going to number these for you. So let me go back, if I could, to the textbook and go to this first page. And here are the objectives up here on top when they come in. And what this first influence is really about is all the things that happen along the way. And as you know, we don't have a very good history of taking care of people in this area. And so that's what this is about. But the working with parents, summarize historical perspectives, and that's what we'll go through. Identify organizations, and that'll be really important. There's several questions on the test about. Examine the development of special ed, including legislation, and it lays out legislation pretty well, and I ask you to be part of that. This is interesting. Describe different disabilities and create an IEP and an IFSP, and I'm not going to actually ask you to create that in this portion, but I am going to ask you to be very familiar, be able to explain it, and answer questions about this IEP process, more than the IFSP, but I'll explain that later. Parents' rights, I'm going to ask you, same thing, to be able to answer questions and explain parents' rights. Discuss special concerns that must be met when working with parents of children with special needs, and they are unique. Identify communication strategies that will help teachers work with culturally and linguistically diverse families who have special needs children. In some of the cultures, those incidences are higher. So first, let's talk about these influences of it. Children and adults with special needs are beginning to matter, and I think we're long past that. I think that's an understatement here for effect that Dr. Rojas likes to use, but I think they have for some time. But there's no arguing there was a time that they didn't. Goes on to say the government schools are trying to create an environment for children with special needs that allow them to participate in society. And here too, society is learning to accept this also over here, these children. And that's part of the inclusion model, is not only for the kids with disabilities, but the other kids. And down here, through history, however, there has been many tales of cruel and inhumane treatment of people with special needs. Recalling the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame quickly brings to mind these cruelties. Are you familiar with that story? The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Um, you can look at that a little bit if you like, but it's just a story of somebody being different and being treated so badly. Spartans were known for forced parents to abandon imperfect babies by leaving them in cold. Okay, we're going to create a thing here like what horrible people we are, but can I just step up and say we didn't know any better. We thought there were flawed things, and that's what we like to do in history, is go back and really vilify these people. But would we be any different if we had lived in that time? There are instances of early history, however, of people who had a more positive view of those who were different. Hippocrates, who lived around 400, believed that the emotional problems were caused not by supernatural powers, but by natural forces. And it wasn't a real popular theory at that time. Plato defended those with mental disabilities as not being able to account for their deeds. Temples built by Alexander the Great provided asylums for mentally ill people. And so there's a long history of people being mentally ill. And I've seen firsthand, and maybe some of you have too, people with mental illness. And it's quite a shocking thing. It just goes on. The first attempts to classify mental illness of advocating treatment with illness, period of 1450 to 1700, was an especially difficult time for those mentally ill or with special needs. Belief in the demology and superstition resulted in persecution of those. So John Locke, concerned with harsh discipline, cultivated the blank tablet. If you're familiar with that, you might have had that in Foundations of American Ed and History a little bit. But he was the first to say, hey, there's nothing there, because we came, at that time they believed that they had this belief that the child is born with these evil ideas. And some give in to it, became mentally ill. So John Locke's one. And this, Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard, this is on the test what he did. So you want to make an X by him here. Sought new methods to teach those with mental challenges. He was a physician and authority on diseases in the ear and education of the deaf. He found this boy and tried to turn him around, produce behavioral changes, unable to teach him to talk or live independently, but he believed he was a failure, but others followed through and thought it was wonderful. So that was his thing. You obviously are familiar with Helen Keller. Really probably advanced this cause as much as anybody in the field of what there was. And I went to a play here in one of the local schools recently that did Miracle Worker, and oh my gosh, it was phenomenal. The person that played Helen Keller and Anne Frank were phenomenal. But that was the beginning of it. But anyway, this is what Itard did. He felt there were some things. Residential schools. But Itard was really the first to really kind of classify these and work with these, and believed in treating these folks better than we had. And then early educational opportunities for these 1800s residential schools for individuals began to emerge. Residential schools and asylums, and this is again, we want to vilify these people. They didn't know any different. So please have that empathy, because a lot of our textbooks look back at a lot of our things in our history and vilify those people who were only doing what they knew. They didn't intentionally want to do this. They didn't know any better. First American residential school were for those who were deaf. And that seems a little odd to you because of the small incidence of this, but there was a huge population of deaf people. That's what drove the need for this over all others back then. Now the incidence of deaf have almost disappeared completely. It was established in 1817 in Hartford, Connecticut by Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. You're familiar with that name? Gallaudet University, Gallaudet College. Yeah. Most early schools avoided severely disabled students because they were like crazy people. And so we didn't know what to do with them. And those with multiple disabilities worked only with those who were deaf, blind, or mentally challenged. If they had more serious disabilities, well, they're often, just put in asylums. Of course, the other thing, these private schools were very expensive. and some are state-operated schools with limited facilities. What they do here, then there was the Perkins School for the Blind, and I think this is on the test also, founded in Watertown, Massachusetts, first school for the blind. And so it was a ways behind for the deaf, but it nonetheless came because, again, we had some childhood disease things and stuff that were causing a disproportionate number of blind, to the point where it was driven whether we needed that. It proved that those who were blind could be taught. Or Laura Bridgman, who was blind and deaf and was educated, seeking education for his daughter. What was the daughter's name? Yeah, Helen Keller. Okay. Arthur Keller consulted the director of the Perkins Institute. So this is where Anne Frank came from. The Diaries of Anne Frank. Yeah, no. A successful person with disabilities did much persuade this. I'm saying Anne Frank, but really it's Anne Sullivan. Annie Sullivan is who it is. I don't know what the other name from the history. And she came to teach, and then her at 7 years of age, and that, of course, at times she was like a crazy woman when she couldn't hear or speak or anything. And then it became a very famous story and really gave hope to everybody with disabilities. But really the 20th century is when they went to these community-based programs for children with special needs. Gaudet College, the only college for those who are deaf, started teacher training programs in the 1890s. In 1904, summer training sessions for teachers of children who were mentally challenged began in Vinland Training School in New Jersey. That comes in there. Community-based programs, however, often became sunshine rooms in which such activities, arts and crafts, were pursued, little to educate them. And then it going on from there. So then these community organizations started to pop up. They have developed to help individuals with special needs that have often developed because their families believed in it. And that's what drove a lot of special education is families. And I say it was mad mothers. Motivated mothers working with children with disabilities drove much of the special ed movement that we know today. And what they wanted is this thing of having a more fulfilling and productive life, especially when they started to see what some of the people that got help could do. These families used their funds of knowledge for the benefit of those who needed the most. They got really committed to it. So here's this Easter seals. This is on the test what this was about. Helping individuals with disabilities and their families over 90 years. Edgar Allan was this businessman who started it. Lost his son in a streetcar accident. This was his beginning of it, 1907. Those were kind of dangerous things. He decided to sell his business and build a hospital in the hometown in Ohio. And as he became involved in this endeavor, he realized that children with disabilities were not visible and often hidden from public view. So his thing isn't so much this streetcar and this hospital. He engaged in a campaign that created what is now known as exceptional organizations to offer hope to others, and children and adults with disabilities. Currently, there are more than 550 centers that provide services for individuals, innovative family focus, and this communities served. And the name of his organization is Easter Seals. This is Edgar Allan. Okay, that's on the test. Know that. Another example of the organization that serves individuals with special needs and their families is Joe Kennedy Foundation. And this is on the test also, what his contribution was. Created by the Kennedys, a powerful, influential family with daughter with disabilities. And you'll see a history of this back then. That's what it was that got me this going, is wealthy people. From Edgar Allan here with a business. The Kennedy money is well documented. And the thing that people don't write about is where that money came from. Do you know where the Kennedy money came from? It's old money now, but Joe Kennedy Sr. got the money. Do you have any idea how he did? I'll give you this. It was illegal how he got the money. But he quickly found the assistance of it. The foundation particularly emphasized the needs to assist families by informing them about resources, including children and adults with disabilities and community. Specific goals of this foundation include this. The other thing you got to know about the Kennedys is Joe Kennedy had a daughter. This is what drove him, a daughter that had a disability. The Kennedys, President Kennedy, Senator Ted Kennedy, had a sister that was mentally challenged. And that really drove this when they saw that she couldn't participate in life like the rest could. And so that they started this Joe Kennedy Jr. Foundation. It emphasizes assist family by informing them about resources, including children, adults, hence the quality of life. This was their goals of it. And then Special Olympics was founded in '68, and this is a sister to the one that was disabled from the Kennedys. Eunice Kennedy Shriver is an athletic program for people with intellectual disabilities, the world's largest sports program. And so that was also started by the Kennedys. Another example of organization includes Associated Retarded Citizens, ARC, previously known as National Association of Retarded Citizens, which was chartered in 1950, became active in influencing states and Congress. In other words, they were a lobby group. A small group of parents and other individuals that act as voices for change. And these are the kinds of things that really drove the change in our culture for people with disabilities. It supported legislation, action, federal established national programs. And as you know, I'm not a big proponent of federal anything, but that's what they got here. 63 support was extended to other people who had special needs except for people who were gifted. Did not receive support until 79. Bureau of Education and Handicap was established in '66. It is important to note that ARC changed its name to the ARC in order to change the terminology that was derogatory in meaning and usage. So that's why this is on the test, why they changed their name, and it was right there, from ARC to the ARC. And if you go back here, what the ARC was is the Association of Retarded Citizens. And so they wanted to not name them something, but refer to that meaning. More recently, organizations Autism Speaks, this is another one's on the test, was created by grandparents of a child with autism. And as you know, we have an epidemic of autism. But their name is Bob and Suzanne Wright. Founded the organization in 2005 when their grandchild was diagnosed with autism. And say nothing motivates people more than when it lands in your own house. And maybe some of you have somebody with a disability in your family, immediate family, but it changes your view. Autism Speaks is the largest nonprofit science and advocacy organization that funds research that focuses on the cause, prevention, and treatment of cure of autism. I hate to tell you, folks, we have nothing. There's very little written about any of these causes, prevention, or treatment, or cure of autism. Very little written. But they can do this, increase awareness of autism spectrum disorders and advocating the needs of individuals. Goes on here, the last example includes Gordon Hartman's foundation. Mission, oh I see, San Antonio, Texas, which created the only amusement park. Isn't that interesting? Morgan's Wonderland. I think that's on the test too. But this is for children and adults with disabilities and their families, of course. The mission of Morgan's Wonderland is to provide a park that will nurture the minds and bodies of individuals with special needs and their families. I don't see here yet the date that this was set, but San Antonio, Texas, Hartman is his name, and it's a park, amusement park. Okay. Inspired to create a space for children with different disabilities and enjoy their benefits of play. Why? Because they had a daughter with physical cognitive disabilities. I'm saying nobody's as motivated as they are when it's their own. Organizations such as the one described have provided children with special needs a lot of support. Well, let me jump back here now and show you where we're going. So here's the early influences. Of opportunities. First, residential schools, and then first in U.S. In 1817 at Gallaudet, remember the first college. And then for the blind, Laura Bridgman and Helen Keller from Watertown, Massachusetts. Then Gallaudet College, still the only for exclusively for deaf. Then this Vinland Training School in New Jersey, training sessions for teachers. Okay, those steps. Now let's go to this, and here's your first input as into this is you need to identify each of these. And I think every one of these are on the test. So you're going to have some knowledge of each one of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. So identify and make yourself some notes there for the test. Okay, so then, and this I say, I'm trying to break it into numbers for you. Here's the first one. Now let's break into the legislation. Well, first is park. And if you, I study this, we study this sometimes in SPed100, Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children. And then Voc Rehab of 73, ADA 08, 94-142. And these are important milestones and amendments of 83. 86, they added the infants and toddlers. Let's go back to the textbook a second and look at this. So here's the legislation, and legislation for people with disabilities have been developed since the 60s, and it was first been a landmark one is coming here, but with each new law or amendment for existing legislation, the programs of children and adults have been more encompassing. The 60s, parents organized the advocacy groups that became vocal, attracted enough attention to result in legislation. And then Park won a landmark case, and this is what this is about. And you'll want to know this here for what Park, and if you just remember that Park, Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Children won a landmark case against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, meaning the state of. It was a decision based on the 14th Amendment that assures all children, including those with disabilities, the right to a free and appropriate public education. Decisions such as this led to the passage of important laws. So 71, we don't have a federal law yet, but it started in the courts, saying that at that time already, all students had a right to a free and appropriate public education except the children with disabilities. And again, I'm going to defend it a little bit because people didn't know what to do with these kids. What we like to do today in our textbooks is vilify those people. There's many cases that had to come before that the schools didn't know what to do with these very severely disabled kids. So this Vocational Rehab Act of 73, we call it Section 504, was the first passage of that. Relates to non-discrimination under federal grants, require that no otherwise qualified handicapped individual in the United States shall, solely by reason of his handicap, and this is still kind of a catch-22, and it simply stated that you couldn't discriminate because they were handicapped. If they met all the qualifications you needed, they couldn't be discriminated against. And to this day, it creates some real issues because there was some undue burden on small business, but even larger ones, they had the capability, except they were in a wheelchair or had something like that. It created some problems. So it was the first attempt at that to say you couldn't discriminate on that. At that time, Section 504 specifically applied discrimination in employment. And that was the first one because we thought it would be too hard to have somebody in a wheelchair. And now, of course, you see most buildings, because of these kind of laws, most buildings are set up for people with wheelchairs and other kinds of disabilities. The Rehabilitation Act amendments of 74 extended coverage to all civil rights, including education and employment. And so they had to beef this up a little just a short time later. So in 73, we said just by employment, but they came back in 74 and said, oh, and you can't discriminate, you can't keep them out of your college, you can't not keep them from jobs, but health, welfare, other social service programs because they have a disability. 504 education funds operate public elementary and secondaries must provide FAPES, and that's an acronym that we'll use in our world is a FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. It went back to Park versus Commonwealth here, that everybody's entitled to a FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. To each qualified individual with disability who is a recipient of jurisdiction regardless of that severity. Because that was a thing, we would still say, we were still finding people that were too severe. And I don't know if it talks about it here, but I think of the case of Timothy versus the Board of Education, that he was very severely disabled, and the school told him, we just can't do anything for them. but this mad mother knew that her child's entitled to a FAPE, as was you and I, and my children, your children. I mean, a FAPE, and this is the thing: everybody's entitled to a FAPE, not just kids with disabilities. And since that legislation passed, there's been confusion about implementation, and this is what happens anytime you pass federal law. Is then we say, what does it mean? And my wife worked in politics for 8 years, and that's what she learned as a legislative person, is you can pass a law, and then somebody else interprets it, which is very easy, very crazy. And then after you've passed it and you thought you've passed something good, they quickly tell you what it means, and it doesn't mean what you thought it did. And they get to make allowances and exceptions and stuff, so it's kind of a crazy world. So as a result of this confusion, the Office of Civil Rights has issued policies and rulings to clarify many of these. And it goes through that here. And this is interesting that this is what it refers to. And if you have not heard this term, it is going to be a common term, but major life activities have to be affected, such as caring for oneself is a big one, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. When a condition does not substantially limit a major life activity, the individual does not qualify for 504. But if they have any interruptions in these areas, they qualify for 504. And this is not special education. This is not special education. This is 504. This is ADA, saying just having access. And where it comes into us is sometimes you'll have children in school that do not meet the requirements for special education, but they may have some issues here that do not limit their ability to access the curriculum. For example, just because you need a hearing aid, that may entitle you to some compensation or some consideration under 504, but not enough where you're involved in special education. So it's a little sticky, it's a little blurry, it's not real clear, but what I need you to understand the difference here between a Section 504 ADA and special education. They are different. Much confusion also exists regarding the relationship between 504 and special education laws. It must be emphasized that Section 504 falls under management of the regular education. So if you are the 3rd grade, 5th grade teacher, 7th grade teacher, you may be managing the 504, not the special ed. And that's a huge issue in schools, because the assumption is right away, if there's any special needs at all, obviously the special ed teachers take care of it, and this is not true. Students have disabilities but who do not qualify for special ed may still be eligible. And that's a whole other process. We'll talk about how you qualify for special ed. But you could have a disability, not qualify for special ed, and still have protections under 504. Okay? I'm not sure you could explain that yet, but that there are different things. And this is much more pertinent to adults in adult life, but it can be in school. And we still see kids that don't qualify for special ed that may qualify for a 504 plan because they could possibly have some interruption or problem in their thing of performing something here. For example, if you can't walk, doesn't necessarily mean at all that you're eligible for special education. If you're in a wheelchair or something like that, you may not qualify for special education, but you would qualify for consideration in 504. So 504 covers a broader range of disabilities that the special ed law also requires public schools to provide students with a FAPE. Remember the FAPE? Here it is again. FAPE. And additional ensures that the student with disabilities are afforded an equal opportunity to participate in school programs. Student is found to be disabled under 504 should be served by the resource provider through the regular education. So if you're in a school and you're the SPED teacher and they want to stick you with monitoring 504 plans, would you please find some support and let them know that that is not the case. If you're the special ed teacher, you are in charge of special education cases, not 504. The exception to this standard would be a student who has been determined eligible as disabled under the IDEA, which is SPED. Such a student could receive special ed services and accommodations required under 504, and that's rare. For students with disabilities who qualify for Section 504, this means that schools are, we'll turn the page, required to make special arrangements with the student have access to full range of programs and activities. Alright, other students need technology to provide physical access to the schools. An example may include a wheelchair lift on a school bus to get to school. Not necessarily the wheelchair, but the lift. Other examples, modifications that might be required in 504 include ramps. You see, it's a little different than SPED. Modifying restrooms. Right? We see that all the time too. You can't hardly go in a building that's been built in the last 30 years that doesn't have accessible restrooms. Got to have a bigger stall with a handrail so they can transfer themselves onto the toilet. Things like that. You see it. Water, drinking fountains lowered so they can roll up to them. You'll see counters in stores and in offices now that are lower, that instead of standing counters a lot of us go to, that they can roll up to them. So determine this based on the use of tests and other evaluations. Evaluate specific areas of needs, not on single intelligence quotient. Because I say sometimes this has nothing to do with their mental capabilities, 504. It just goes on talking here about how to make those determinations. Enforcement of the 504 Rehab Act is programs that receive funds from the Department of Ed, federal dollars, is provided by the Office of Civil Rights, OCR. There are 12 enforcement offices and a headquarters in Washington, D.C., of course, the most expensive place in the world to office and live, bar none, and that's where they have their office. And they will, like civil rights laws, is monitored OCR. And so if there's a complaint, that's where you go. And it shouldn't be you, it should be the parents who bring this up if they have a complaint, and it happens all the time. But the OCR wants to foster these relationships with schools and parents to address special education needs of students and federal funds. Enforcement procedures include administrative remedies, private right to action in federal court, monetary damage, injunctive relief, attorney fees, and defunding by the U.S. Department of Ed. Okay. Now it goes on to this ADA that we were just talking about, was made more comprehensive by ADA of 90. Is a child in it, child care centers were designed as public accommodations, which are available to all who desire to use them. And it goes through that part of it about ADA. The Act stipulates that the Architectural Transportation Barriers Compliance Board will issue minimum accessibility guidelines. So that's one thing you do. You turn that over to the feds to determine that. But basically, we can't build any kind of an educational setting now that doesn't have this access. Then it goes down here to say they make the event even stronger. The Department of Justice has revised ADA regulations, revising Title I and Title III standards of what they are. And it went into the state and local government facilities, public accommodations, and, of course, into the private sector and told them what to do. In addition, ADA also requires access to medical care services facilities. So really, it really permeated all aspects of life. And that's how they would want it to more fully integrate people with disabilities. And then, the landmark case. And this is, if you're ever asked about special ed, and this will be a good question for you as an interviewing teacher, but just here it is. It's called Public Law 94-142. Education of All Handicapped Children Act of 75. So even though we had things on the books, this is the first piece of federal legislation requiring that the FAPE, because they all knew they had the FAPE was around, but it wasn't being honored. And so here was the first piece, 94-142. I need you to identify. Let me see if I can go back here. All right. Let me. So here is number 2 that we're going to look at of each of these. Okay, so this is number 2, and this is each of these. You need to have some information for me of what these are and what they do. Okay. Going into the legislation here. This is where we're headed. There's the park there. Okay, we're not quite to that yet, so let's go back to the textbook. And this is a big term that is mushy. Can I use that word? Okay, and 75, 94, 142. Oh, that's what I was going to do. I was going to have you do this. Right here, you have to tell what this means. You tell me exactly what PL stands for. What does PL stand for? What does 94 stand for? And what does 142 stand for? You put that right here in your notes. And you make it red so I can see it. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to write something about each of these here. We said this is number 2. Okay. So all people between the ages of 3 and 18 must be rated up FAPE. There's that again, a FAPE. It'd be nice if you'd work that into conversation, a FAPE. Make you look smart and intelligent. A term appropriate means suited to the disability, age, maturity, past achievements, and a child with prenatal parental expectations. And again, I say why I say the term appropriate's mushy is because we all have different ideas of what's appropriate, and many, many court cases built on that term, what is appropriate. And I unfortunately have been tangled in a couple of them, and they're interesting when it's school against families and families against schools. And yeah, this means the child will be placed in the classroom that will benefit the child the most. Okay, and that's where we get into this about a least restrictive environment or mainstreaming. What we're going to do is where will they benefit the most, and that decision is made by the team, the IEP team, which is coming up. No one person makes that. If the student would benefit more from a regular classroom, child's placed there. So then we get into this, what is the term mainstreaming and inclusion? It becomes synonymous with placing children with disabilities in the regular classroom. But we're not sure. Let's see if we can distinguish between them what they are. Okay. However, meeting the child's needs in the least restrictive environment, and this is why I'm going to ask you to be able to separate these. But the least restrictive environment comes back here to where will the child do the best. The child will benefit more from the regular classroom it's there. If it's not the regular classroom, it's someplace else. That is the least restrictive environment. It can also refer to moving a child with disabilities out of the regular classroom into a resource room or a self-contained special ed room. Okay, it can be one of those things. The law requires diagnosis and individualization of the education program. Legal mandates for more participation of students with disabilities in general. The classes have prompted teachers to participate in collaborative planning and teaching, particularly for children with special needs or culturally linguistic diverse. And so that's one of the solutions of trying to use the least restrictive environment and including the regular classroom is this collaborative process between the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher. And the process includes planning and teaching. Now, it takes staffing. It takes people. It's some scrutiny because of that, because you have to release these teachers to do some planning and to work together. But some of the more successful models of inclusion or least restricted environment involve a higher dose of this. And this is one of the things maybe we fall short a little bit in preparing you in this area is this collaboration between you and the special ed teacher or you and the regular ed teacher. And those of you that will be special ed teachers and a regular ed teacher that have both degrees probably will do some of this on your own, but you'll also be more qualified. Additional terms that reflect the delivery of services in the least restricted environment include pull-out. Be familiar with that. That's and push-in. I'm much more familiar with the term pull-out. Pull-out services are those that include where children or similar needs are pulled out of their base classroom to meet with the specialist for small group teaching, and push-ins are those in which the specialist assigned to children with disabilities works in the regular classroom, the base classroom. Specialists work with students with and without disabilities, and that's interesting because there's been some disagreement over that, that if I'm in the regular classroom that I should only work with kids with disabilities, and that is not true. And if you are witnessing that, then that is an error. That you're all teachers and you work with the kids that need help. Obviously you would keep a closer eye on kids with disabilities, but everybody is in the regular class. So that the children with disabilities are not separated from their peers. Reverse inclusion is a type of program in which typically developing children are brought to the special ed classroom for short periods of time, interact with the children with disabilities. And you see this more in the lower grades. You see this more with severely and profound kids, but what it does, it creates a model where the kids with disabilities are in a safer, more comfortable environment, and kids come in and work with them in there. And been some phenomenal things. And if you wanted to have kids really learn their subjects, whether it's reading, writing, arithmetic, math, have them go teach that to kids with disabilities. That interaction is priceless. So they have disability, have an opportunity to interact with others, but also gives a typically developing child an opportunity to see how special need kids learn. My youngest son would be wonderful at that with his empathy for people. He would be phenomenal. So you'll talk about 94-142, and you will talk about this one, the amendments of 83. And this is PL 98-199, Education of Handicap Act amendments. Extend to physical authorization of federal aid. This is money. State and local school systems through 87. They're going to try and give you some money. Improve reporting and information dissemination requirements increased. Increase assistance to children who are deaf and blind. Provide grants for transitional programs. This is when they first now had to have a transition program, transition plan with each IEP after the age of 14. Expanded services for children from birth to age 5. So it's a lot of changes. Look at all these changes. And that's what you'll note most about 83 and 98-199 is a lot of changes, most specifically that now there was special ed for birth to age 5. And how do you have special ed for birth through age 5? Let's go on and find out. Okay, so 83. And now in 86 they come back and they very specifically lay out this. This is 99-457. So you've had 94-142, 98-199, and 99-457. And I'm telling you folks, you're going to be revisiting these in the future. So hang on to those things. So 99-457, the Education of the Handicap Acts of 86, 99-4 established statewide, comprehensive, coordinated, multidisciplinary interagency programs of early intervention services for infants and toddlers with handicaps and their families. Okay, that is what you will bring here, is that. And here they are. 93. And 99-457, this one here. That whole mouthful I just said comes back in here. All right, statewide, comprehensive, coordinated, and multidisciplinary. Do you know what that is? Many hands, not just one service provider, many. Interagency programs, meaning agencies work together. Lots of agencies involved of early intervention services for infants and toddlers with handicaps. And here's the key, and their families. And this is how this early childhood program worked for infants and toddlers. It wasn't special ed so much for babies that were just born, but for their families. And hence that program. The law addressed easily recognized needs of very young with disabilities, because that's one of the questions you have. How do you have special ed for somebody that's just born? And what you did, that's why it's not an IEP here, it's an IFSP, a family service plan. You're working with the family, and these are specialized people. Often you folks here in this program would not fill this role, but you could get certified to do this. But there are programs that certify folks in early childhood special education. and then you would be eligible and certified to work with this. However, there are many conditions that are not immediately recognized, so services early in midlife may be delayed for those with genetic conditions associated with mental challenges. Congenital syndrome associated with delays goes through all these things, and low birth weight. There are also concerns for infants whose parents are developmentally delayed, have severe emotional disturbance, or are 15 or younger. Okay, it's just a little scary. Think of a mother that's 15 years or younger or is developmentally delayed. I dealt with some of that when I was teaching in the middle school. A gal in our middle school that was mentally retarded that was become pregnant, and all the things that go with that. And she was, well, what the sad thing was, her stepbrother, who lived in the same house, raped her, who was the same age. And they didn't know anything about it till they figured out she was pregnant. And they came to school one day and arrested him and took him away. Parents or caretakers may have difficulty finding the program service they need for this, okay? So if you can't find it, and I'm familiar with this organization, Council of Rural Special Education, they put that in there. Okay. Let me go back here. So this coming down here to legislation began in the 60s. Here's the park. The Vocal Rehab Act is where we're headed. So I'm back here, and these are all defined. So the only one you really have to do here is this. Tell me what these are. PL 94 142, because it goes into describing these different ones now for you. And again, hang on to some of this because it's very word for word on the test. ADA, as I talked about, legislation here. Here's the amendments, talks about what they are. Here's that they brought this in for you here. Such nice people. There that is. But please be able to distinguish between 94 142, 98 and 199, and 99 457. You've got to be able to sort those out on the test. Okay. Now we go into IDEA. This just finished talking about acres, how they want to reach out to people, especially in our small rural areas. Offers links to other organizations serving children with disabilities. 99 457 provided for public supervision at no cost, except for federal state laws allow, meeting the needs of handicapped infants and toddlers and family and training. So that's what that was, is how to work with these. And it doesn't go into this any more than this on the family service plan and stuff here. But it's for the families. And I had to take one course in this in grad school in this area, and it was all about dealing with families that go through the shock of learning at birth or shortly after birth their child has disabilities, and it's quite a deal. Again, it does not hit home until it hits your family. All right, then IDEA. And you surely have talked about this in SPED 100 or in other SPED classes. Federal law, formerly the Educational Law Handicap Act. So this is 94 142, now changed to called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was reauthorized in 97 is when the name changed. So you might want to hang on to that. When did that change? 1997. Went into effect in the 98. It's reauthorized. Here's a little nugget for you. Every 7 years. So 97 to 04. And it always takes a year then to interpret. Remember I said before, when there's a law, then somebody interprets it. And this is exactly what happens. Congress passes something and another body gets to say, we call it the regs. Get to establish the regulations, set up the regs. And regularly, what they thought they passed and what actually was is different. We saw it this year in the healthcare law. What was passed was completely clouded. In fact, the Speaker of the House said we have to pass it first, then we'll find out what's in it. That's kind of what happens to this. we urge Congress to pass something, and then we'll decide what's in it. So it's a very interesting way to do business. But 97, 04, then when? Yeah, 11. So every time they do this, it's huge because everybody gets nervous when it's reauthorized and what's going to mean, what are the changes are. And we do many, many seminars trying to get people up to speed what the changes in special education law are. Okay, so we went to 94, 07 here. Okay, 94 and 07 organized into 4 parts: general provisions, B, school-age preschool, 3 to 5, and infants and toddlers, birth through 2, and support. So this is how they broke out: general provisions, school-age, and this is how special ed's run. It's really called school-age, and then there's 3 to 5s, and then birth to 2, and this is the IFSP group. Remember, really hard to teach this group to have IEP goals, but you would have family goals. I'm getting them going. I say because the family is generally jolted pretty hard, and they find that many of these children are born to low-income families. That creates some needs also. And although I like many ways, the difference includes zero reject. In Part B, it requires that no exclusion of children through age 3 to 21 in public school systems are responsible for including all these children in the education program regardless of their disability. And this is one of the principles: zero reject. And you learn that in SPED 100. Part C for infants gives discretion to the states to develop a program that best serves the needs of infants and toddlers. Each state determines which agency can work most effectively with parents, and their infants and toddler states use different agencies such as the Department of Education and Health and Human Services. For infants and toddlers with identified disabilities, there must not be a break in services as they transition from Part C to B, and B, of course, is school age at 3 to 5. Terms used in the Act are this: the handicapped child has changed to child with disabilities. And you knew that, right? Yeah, I was part of this a few years back of Part C, where I was on the committee that determined this very thing: which agency can best serve in those areas. And we had like, I want to say 13 grants in the state of South Dakota, and different agencies vied for that money to run these programs. And so I sat on the committee that made those decisions. Very interesting process. Terms: handicapped child, child with disabilities. And let me just see if they bring this up. But all children with disabilities have an education that is individualized to meet the needs. This is written on IEP. So here is a second one of the principles: is if you are determined to have a disability, a learning disability, you are on an IEP or an IFSP. If you determine to have disabilities by special ed standards, you are on an IEP. Zero recheck, all special ed students on IEPs. Teachers, special ed teachers, administrators, parents, others are concerned with the child are involved in that development of the IEP. This IEP team, we call it. If appropriate, the child is also included. If appropriate, how do you know when? I taught middle school. I invited them all the time. Many times they didn't want to come. In high school, if you're teaching high school special ed, I would insist that they're part of it, part of that meeting. Okay. Go back to this. IDEIA. Now we got an I in here. The Individual Disability Education Improvement Act. So we had to put this term in here in 2006. New regulations in 06. That was a reaction to the last update of 04. And here are those changes. Meet procedural requirements of IDEA, convene legally correct IEP meetings, develop educationally meaningful IEPs. Is that a little subjective? It's kind of like the word appropriate. Conduct relevant assessments, link assessments results to goals and services. And that's the big thing, is that your assessments are with the goals. Develop measurable annual goals. Determine how you will measure progress towards those goals. Develop schedule for doing this. Base services on peer-reviewed research. Implement program modifications in the general education classroom. Provide related services when necessary. Okay. So those are the steps of IDEIA, Improvement Act of '06. Lots and lots of laws in special education. Sorry, you will be tangled in this. You will be part of this. Thank you. And so I'm going to ask you to sort this through and be able to explain. So the development of the IEP, which is everybody with a disability in school are on an IEP, illustrates the goals that schools and parents want their children with disabilities. Because remember, the parents have to be part of it. Parents are now part of any decision made for the child. 3 pages of IEP for a preschool child who was adopted from China in infancy are illustrated coming up on next here. IEP for a preschool child, a little bit different. All children 3 to 21 with disabilities receive any type of special education services must have an IEP, especially for them. It must be the product of the joint efforts of members of the IEP team, which must include these: a parent, at least one regular education teacher. And I'm going to ask you to tell why this is. But this person and at least one special education teacher, or appropriate, at least one special education provider of a child. A representative of a local educational agency, qualified to provide or supervise the provision. This is like the principal or SPED director or somebody that is authorized to grant the money to make the program work. It could be the special ed teacher, but often, especially early on, it'd be great to have somebody there that's a representative of the school. And why we say local education agency, because a lot of times these programs may be administered from a special agency, but they are qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specifically designed instruction to meet the unique needs of this. And B, knowledge about general curriculum, and C, knowledge about the availability of resources. And that's the big one, that they have the authority to designate resources for this. So a school representative, and then at least one individual who can relate the evaluation results, so the goals and the steps of the IEP. And this too possibly could be the special ed teacher, but if you can get that person that administered those, and I think of, in my world, it was always the psychologist who administered the IQ test. I did the achievement tests as a special ed teacher, but if this person was not available, I could interpret those results. But if you can get that person who relate the evaluation results and goals and steps here. And 6, at the discretion of the parent or the agency, other individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the child, including related service personnel. So who is that? That may be the speech therapist and language therapist, a physical therapist, somebody like that. Let me tell you some extremes that I had involved. I had involved one time the bus driver was the only one who connected with the kid. More than once I had somebody from court services. If the student was involved with courts, and I worked with many of them that were, I tried to get their court service worker there. Was very effective. That person always had way more power over the child than the parent did. If they had a personal EA, I always try and include the personal EA, their teacher's assistant with them. Okay, so those are kind of some extremes who that could be. And then whenever appropriate, the child with a disability is cited in this. And this is what I said is, as they get older, I would be more and more demanding that they're there. The IEP should accomplish these things. Serves as a communication. Okay, and this is what I'm going to say to you is, it's about communication. Vehicle between parents and school personnel enables them as equal participants or jointly decide the child's needs. Okay, so it's a communication vehicle. The IEP process provides an opportunity for resolving any differences. Parents and the school concerning special education services. So communication, resolving differences, first through the IEP meeting, and second, if necessary, through procedural protections. In other words, a parent has a right to disagree. And again, there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of court cases over parents disagreeing with schools' decisions or schools' placements, and there's a vehicle for that. So here is an example of an IEP agenda. And what this means is you send this out ahead of time for Periwinkle here, and you ask the parents when they can come, and you just tell them what it's going to be about. And in the IEP world, in the special ed world, you send this ahead of time. And this is the term they put on here, is they're saying is it's always a draft until it's signed. It's not a document until it's signed by the parents and the school. So here's just some example goals on IEP for Periwinkle here. And this is the one that's 3 to 5. It has personal and social play skills. And how we're going to document it is with teacher observation here. And then it gives this, first of all, and this is always on IEP, this present level, what can they currently do? And let's say Periwinkle, let me fix this. Periwinkle is now playing beside her classmates in structured playing settings. She is beginning to demonstrate independent parallel play. That's some preschool talk there for you. She is also entering into some associative play with the activity non-threatening to her, like free drawing and stuff. She is interested in playing with a wider variety of toys. It goes on, and then they say, so what is your goal? Periwinkle will exhibit cooperative play skills with 3 successive of 4 opportunities evaluated 3 times per school year. And then those short-term steps towards that. With these 3 successive of 4, a pair will exhibit parallel play skills and a variety of play settings, take turns, those kinds of things. You can read that in your book. And then it says, here's the progress comments that you put when you're communicating this with parents. And then here's how you determine how this is going to be evaluated. Will it be classroom participation? How will the progress toward this be measured? And this is up to the teacher to measure this. And it'll be counting stuff like checklists or classroom work, criterion reference, homework, norm reference, observation. And this one is teacher observation. It says right here. And that's how we're going to make that determination. So let's go on to the next goal and see what that one's about. I'm now on page 255. Again, we have the present level performance. This way all the goals are written. And it talks about how it affects them. And then their goal here, what does the student need to do to be able to do? Will be attend a variety of classroom activities for a 20-minute period following activities. And then here's the things that will be part of that. Here's their progress comment again. Here's how we're going to measure it by teacher observation again. Here's another one. This is beginning to wrote count as a concept. Okay, so we're going to count. So with the GANs, this is different. Classroom participation tells exactly how it affects them, and then here we'll count out of 5 objects from a large group of objects. 3 successful 4 opportunities is monitored to this. Rote count to 20. Demonstrate one of correspondence up to 8. And again, it tells you how you're going to do that. Those are IEP goals, and it has a little progress report that you would send here later on. So that is examples. Okay, here goes on. What is the IEP? It sets forth in writing a commitment to resources necessary. So it's resources on the IEP to receive needed special education services. The IEP is a management tool. That's another thing it is, to help ensure that each child with disability is provided special ed and related services. Familiar with that term from your SPED 100, related services? Related services are those things they may need to access the school and the curriculum. This is where they may need that lift on the bus. They may need a special ride. They may need counseling. They may need medical support. They may need physical therapy or speech therapy. Those are all related services in order to access school and the curriculum. The IEP is a compliance and monitoring document. So that's another thing it is. Used by authorizing monitoring personnel from each government level to determine whether a child with a disability is actually receiving this FAPE. IEP serves as an evaluation device. To the extent the child's progress toward meeting the outcomes. Ideally, the IEP would do these things also. Specifies the assessment yield information that will enable the student to be involved in the progress. Require that the IEPs must now state how the student's disability affects academic achievement. And that was to try and make these more real is you write in there, how does it affect their disability affect academic achievement? Require that annual, measurable, academic, functional, and including benchmarks be related to the child's progress in the general curriculum. And that's a mouthful. Requires the IEP to state the supplementary aids and services that are needed to be successful. Requires the IEP teams to consider positive behavior intervention strategies. There's a thing on the IEP that you mark if their behavior is impeding their learning, and if you mark yes, then you have to come up with a plan of how to interject these positive intervention strategies. And then requires IEP includes an explanation to the extent, if any, which the child will not be with in the regular class. And so you have to justify why they're not in the regular classroom or in regular extracurricular activities. Adds this the regular teachers, the IEP team, and of course that seems obvious, but it's not quite as obvious when they get to middle school and high school when they have a whole plethora of teachers. You know, in elementary it's quite simple, it's their teacher. But by middle school on, they don't have a teacher, they don't have their teacher anymore. So that's why this language here comes in. Requires the IEP state how the parents will be regularly informed. How are we going to communicate progress to parents? Has to be part of the IEP. Allows local districts to use IDEA funds to support students in general ed classroom without concerns. Students without disabilities might also benefit. Right? Many requirements must be met when dealing with a child with disability. IEP should be reviewed periodically and not less than annually. Are you familiar with that? It can be evaluated periodically, but it has to be done at least annually, at least once a year by the anniversary date. So if we're writing it, you know, on January 10th, it has to be reviewed before January 10th of next year. 2004 IDEA reauthorization changed attendance requirements that all members of the IEP do not need to attend the reevaluation meeting. That's interesting. If they are, if the area they represent is not being discussed. Okay, so in other words, if you have these 7 teachers are your middle school teachers, and we're not even talking about science, the science teacher doesn't have to be there. Administrators and teachers must be aware of all procedures that schools are responsible for administering, and it's a lot. It's a lot of things. It's a load. These procedures include the following types of subject definitions, opportunities, examine records, independent educational evaluations, all those things. And then, let me just jump back here one time. Not quite to that yet. Yeah, here we're talking about goals and schools parents want for the children with disabilities. And all that. Okay, and then rights responsibility for parents. 9704 addressed the participation of parents in the development of the child's program. It states that, remember local education, LEA, because it not necessarily mean the school or the state agency, will ensure, and that's a little mushy how that happens, that parents are members of any group that makes decisions of the educational placement of their child. And I'll tell you how this changed, because I lived through this. And that is, we used to decide, especially to do an evaluation or a re-evaluation, we would get together, a few of us, and decide, gee, I think we ought to give this assessment, that assessment. In 1997 said, you no longer can do that without at least inviting parents to be part of that. They have to be invited. They don't have to come. They have to come to the IEP meeting. They have to come to the assessment meeting, but they have to be invited. You have to document and have on file the documentation that they were invited to any meeting. And this is interesting too. They can examine all records, participate in meetings regarding evaluations, placement, free and appropriate public education. This must notify them when an agency proposed to refuse or initiate or change. So here's a big thing in the special ed world is notify, notify, notify. Notify parents when the agency proposes or refuse to initiate. You want to make a change or not make a change that the parents are requesting, they have to be have to be informed. Or the placement of the child. And what's placement? If you're familiar with the term placement, placement is where you're going to serve the child. It's going to be the regular classroom, the resource room, the self-contained. Where placement really comes into play is if you need to put them in a separate agency or a hospital or an alternative school. That placement really comes to play there. Parents have the right to inspect and review all records relating to their child. The public agency collects all the things it collects, maintains, or uses regarding their student. I don't know why my pages aren't flipping today, but they're not very well. There we go. This is also interesting. Parents have the right to obtain independent evaluation. These are the rights. And I'm going to ask you to be able to speak to these and address these. Okay. They have a right related to the record of all the things that are maintained. Anything that has to do with their child, they have a right to inspect. So, this is going to seem petty, but if you just keep a few notes on the child on your desk or in a file, what we call a working file, they have a right to inspect them. Why would they want to do that? The reason they'd possibly want to do it is to challenge your decision-making process on some of these other things. Okay, this is a biggie. They have to consent before you evaluate the child the first time. They have to. If they don't consent to this, you will not do what we call an initial evaluation. Can't happen. You have the right to obtain an independent evaluation. If you disagree one way or the other, if a parent disagrees that they don't think their child is disabled and they want another evaluation, or more commonly where this came into play, the school said child not disabled, parents feel they are and want special ed services, they have the right to obtain this at the school's expense. Yeah. But even if they pay for it themselves, the school has to take that into consideration in this process. Then, this one here, parental consent is required for a child's initial special education placement. We do the assessment. We determine, yes, they do have a learning disability. If the parents do not consent, they are still not involved in special education in this placement. Remember what placement was? Placement is where the child is going to receive special ed services. The regular class, the resource room, self-contained, alternative school, something like that. Okay. And parents have the right to challenge or appeal any decision related to the identification, evaluation, and placement of the child. How do you appeal it? That's another process. But this is where I say to parents, you have the right to disagree. Disagree. Parents are responsible for notifying a public agency if they plan to remove their child from the public agency for placement in a private school. Some landmark cases about that. How I didn't think you were doing a very good job of educating my child with a disability, has a learning problem, or whatever it is. I take them out. I go down the road to a private agency of some kind. You can say private school, but often a private agency, and they do a much better job. Now, I would like you as the school to pay for this, and that is a possibility, but we have to be notified. The parents have to notify us. And so you would say to a parent, one of the things, responsibility, you have to notify us if you're moving your child to take to a private school at public expense, not just at going there, at public expense, if you expect us to pay for it. And that is a precedent that could happen, that you could opt to put them in a private agency or school at public expense, and then you can come back and haggle over these other things and who pays and that stuff, but you can't just do it because there's some cases about that. And then parents are responsible for notifying the public agency if they intend to request due process hearing. And what is due process hearing? is this thing of disagreeing with this. Okay. And then notifications. These are all rights and responsibilities for parents. There are also procedural safeguards that require written notification to parents prior to any proposed action. Notification must be in a parent's native language, preferred mode of communication, for example, Braille or sign language. There is protection for child's rights when parents cannot be located. A whole nother thing. When kids are wards of the state or something like that. Then mediation, if disagreements arise, a mediation system employing a qualified, impartial mediator must be available. Parents may be required to attend a mediation meeting. Then this is interesting. This is somewhat new. The development delay category, previously used to placement of children 3 to 5, was recognized as appropriate for 3 to 9, and therefore extended to cover all that age group. In other words, if the child comes into kindergarten or first or second grade up till age 9 and they just are not making the progress they should be, they could be categorized as developmental delay. After age 9, they have to be in one of the other categories that we'll be getting into down here. But and then charter schools knew, since their IDA were included in the provisions, they must follow the same guidelines as other publicly funded schools. Okay. Parents' rights, and I'm going to ask you to work with those. Then the following descriptions of children with disabilities defined in IDA 34 Code of 37 will clarify those who need special services. If a student in a classroom fits into any of the following categories, special services should be provided. Okay. I'm not going to have you do it here, but I'm going to have you do it later, and that is describe each of these. And I'll tell you one that I did not know about. This one. I'm not sure when that came into being, but that one is new. Tourette's. And why is because it's a huge increase in the incidence of Tourette's. So let me go back and just speak these for you, and so you're familiar with them. Well, that one doesn't want to come back, so we'll flip up here. Autism, deafness, some of these are little, because you're going to have to come back to these. Mental disabilities, and this is our new thing for mental retardation. We don't have that term anymore, it's mental disabilities. Multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impaired, and that is a very interesting one, and it lifts a whole bunch of things that fall into this, but the most common one that we're seeing is the kids that have ADD and ADHD, having a limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to a chronic or acute health problem such as heart conditions, tuberculosis, rheumatic fever, nephritis, asthma, sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, epilepsy, lead poisoning, leukemia, or diabetes. It adversely affects child's educational performance. According to the Office of SPED, eligible children with attention deficit disorder may also be classified under other health impaired. Right. And then I'm going to jump over number 9 there. 10, okay, and then down here the biggest category, specific learning disability, and it goes through what those are. And then speech and language impairments, and so there's a ton of them here. Traumatic brain injury was added in 90, I believe. Visual impairment including blindness. Okay, and it gives you different ones here. It's partially sighted, low vision, legally blind, totally blind students. And then pervasive development disorder, delay in sociological motors. Child maybe have social development delays, and that's a relatively new one also, as a category of delays in different magnitude and different domains. All right. Oh, here's the Tourette's, and what that is. And then emotional disturbance is a huge one also, and it has to try and lay this out what that is. Okay. And I'm not going to go there on this group here, but there they are. I'm going to ask you to look at that later. So gifted and talented, and it's kind of a flyover in my opinion. It's always kind of an afterthought of it. Gifted and talented 561 provides financial incentives, training, and research for identifying and educating talented and gifted students. And this is the name, I think this is on the test. Javits, Students Education Act of '88, federal funding earmarked for gifted education. My understanding it's gone, but that's what it was in '88. 21 states providing funding for gifted children. Ours is not one of them. Most states do not require this. And so what happened is a lot of these schools, when that went away, when things got tough, this is one of the things they cut because it wasn't required. But 21 states still have gifted programs. Let me just flip back to the text and see what it says about gifted. Here an attention deficit, and it develops that itself. It goes under the other health impairment. And again, be familiar with this, because I guarantee the number one thing you'll get questions on are these. The top three, obviously. Number one is still learning disabilities, but the other two are autism, spectrum disorder, and attention deficit. So you want to develop an expertise in working with kids. Those would be the areas, and families in these areas, because even different than learning disabilities, autism and attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, does not shut off when they leave the school. Learning disabilities, the child can go home and function completely normal. Autism and attention deficit does not. They bring those same characteristics and traits home. And so you have to know that symptoms that are a sign of our problems with paying attention, being very active, and acting before thinking impulsively. 3 types are this: an attentive type, which the person cannot seem to focus on a task, obviously. Hyperactivity, in which the person is very active and often acts without thinking, that impulsivity. And then, of course, being combined, that they do both. And so why it's important to distinguish, because the services they need will be different based on whether they have one or the other or both. And I will say this: we've made some great strides in working with kids with ADD and ADHD, but much to go. And again, when it hits home, it's when it's your child. And then they go into a brief look at autism, learning disabilities and mental disabilities. Autism, known as a complex neurobiological disorder, and it's a huge deal. Here it talks about the characteristics. The most common one is here. This is the thread in the whole spectrum is communication problems. And this is a bigger one that's more obvious. This difficulty relating to people, objects, and events, unusual play with toys or other objects, difficulty with changes in routine or familiar surroundings, repetitive body movements. This is extreme. You can be autistic and not show these as much, but the one that I think continually comes through is here, when we call it social issues. Difficulty relating to people, objects, or events, and difficulty changing routines. And again, I say these kids do not shut this off when they go home. That's why it's so prevalent to parents that have children that are diagnosed in this spectrum. Autism can be characterized by a broad range of behaviors, which has led diagnosticians to describe autism as a broad spectrum disorder, meaning we can't get our arms around it. This results in the need for teachers and parents to recognize the difference in the needs of children, depending on how their disability manifests itself. Here's how I say about it, folks. After the years I've had in special ed, when you say learning disability, I can get my arms around it. I can talk about it, I can prescribe it, I can diagnose it, I can work with it. I know about learning disabilities. When it comes to autism, this broad spectrum of from very severe to very profound autistic. Let me give you an extreme as Rain Man, and he was a very high functioning person with autism. Most of them that are aren't that well mannered and well trained, but he really, and they say he studied those folks for quite a while to really get that roll down. But he brought a lot of attention to, and the thing is that interesting about that is that that's so extreme that you can have much more mild cases that show these things more than what he had. Children with autism respond best in predictable and consistent programs. It talks about it here. and learning disabilities are primarily typically developed children. And this is important to understand because I don't think we distinguish that enough. Primarily typically developing children. They're not primarily visually impaired, hearing impaired. In fact, you have to agree that none of these impede this. Children with learning disabilities show wide discrepancies in intra-individual differences in the profile of their development. This is often shown in marked discrepancies, and that's a term that is too big, in one or more of the specific areas. Could be in language development, language facilities. These affect child's behavior in the areas of thinking, conceptualizing, memory, language, perception, reading, writing, spelling, arithmetic. And folks, when you explain this to parents, you've got to break that down smaller. You've got to get it in chunks they can bite. But this is by far still the largest group of disabilities. Concept of deviation of a child with learning disabilities implies that the child deviates so markedly from the norm for their age that they need this specialized instruction. And nowadays, you really have to have a discrepancy. Such specialized instruction required for those children may be valued to other children. However, the population to be served with special ed funds authorized for does not include children with learning problems that are a result of poor instruction or economic culture. In this process, that's one of the things you have to mark on the box, that their discrepancy is not the result of poor instruction or economic deprivation. The thing that's interesting about this is, how do you know? How do you know? You don't. You just, I mean, even if they're from a low-income area or whatever, it's just very, I've never marked that box and said, this is what's causing it. So what are some of those signs of learning disabilities? Generally recognized when the child enters school. Tasks are expected. No one sign says the child has a learning disability. You can watch this. Describe and discuss learning disorders. They have trouble with the alphabet, rhyming, not understand what he or she reads. And I would, if I were you, I would bring characteristics in and have this handy, what those characteristics are. And then tips for teachers and parents. Learn as much about learning disabilities as you can. Observe the child playing and working. Recognize the strengths and interests. And it's a whole nother lesson on working with kids with learning disabilities. Then mental or cognitive disabilities, and this is the mental retardation now. A person's brain to learn, think, solve problems, make sense of the world, called intelligence or intellectual functioning. Average IQ test is 100, and those classified mentally challenged score 70 to 75 or below. Did you know that? Mental retardation or mentally or cognitive disability is if you have 70 plus or minus 5 or below. And of course, the farther down they go, the more disabled they are. And this is what mental impairments have to do with is adaptive skills, daily living skills such as dressing, using bathroom, feeding yourself, communication skills like understanding what is said and being able to respond, social skills. More than 614 children ages 6 to 21 with mental disabilities have need for special services. In fact, 1 out of every 10 children in special ed has some form of mental retardation. 1 out of 10 in special ed, not 1 out of 10 children, 1 out of 10 in special ed. It's about 4 or 5 out of 10 have learning disabilities. It goes on. I'm going to flip here and flip back. Oh, tips for parents in both of these. And again, you may want to bring these in your work with that. Applications of disabilities of learning. Popular philosophy have been we could best motivate young people by pleasing in attractive settings. I'm going to let you read through this. And then here's the gifted and talented thing. 95-561. Jacob Javis, gifted and talented students for Education Act of 88. Programs of gifted, 20 states administered gifted programs. 6 states offered this. 21 states mandated partially funded gifted programs. 4 states mandated gifted programs. 11 states do not require gifted programs. 8 states do not mandate gifted programs, and no gifted funding is available. And of course, this is to point out and make fun of South Dakota. That's why she loves these kind of lists here to say, "You're a bad state, South Dakota." And so are these other states, are bad states. I don't know. If you have a gifted child, this is really prevalent. Some make a case for gifted programs to be just as important to serve them, especially as you do kids with learning disabilities or learning problems or any kind of disability. I don't know. You get to decide on this, but this is the way it's stated right now. Each state makes its own decision how they do it. So that's the gifted. We'll go into this child find program. Let me flip back here first. Child find, federally funded program to locate children with disabilities in order to ensure families know their rights and have access to information. And you've heard me whine many times. Anytime I see federally funded, I'm suspicious of how it's run and operated. I just think it's hard to be effective when you're operating from 10,000 miles in the air. When the federal government, with all the bureaucracy and things, I'm just no fan of anything that's federally funded, but this is to locate children with disabilities. And they go through this evaluation process of notice must be provided that informed consent obtained. Remember we talked about there's no single procedure to determine. Child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability, not just in one. Determination of eligibility shall be made by a team. And this is could be the IEP team, but it's an assessment of qualified professionals, and that's a real punchy thing too, and the child's parents. But anytime we talk in these terms too, it just seems to kill communications and stuff. Qualified professionals, and now you and I fall into that, but just be a little careful when you're talking about this. When you explain this process to somebody, I would find some other softer words than qualified professionals. I would say something softer like this would be a group of us that know something about this. Qualified professionals, I hate those terms. We'll go to part C. Let me go back here, this child find program, but that's what that's about, money to go find these. Man, live, I'm having a hard time today. Heard parents, children with this, I don't know how to help my child, I just wanted to make sure. But nonetheless, it's a program to help find them. Concern about reaching parents and their children with disabilities resulted in the federal funding of the Child Find Act. Getting private schools, regardless of the severity of the disabilities and who are in need of special ed and related services, located and evaluated in a practical thing. Child Find is designated to locate children with disability using a feasible method available, such as door-to-door surveys, media campaigns, disseminations. And here's what it looks like for the most part is you put things in the paper saying we're doing child finds, we're doing screening, come have your child screened. And it says 10.3, and we'll go look at that, this process. Research names such as count your kid in and make a difference have been used to designate type programs saying bring them. And for the most part, people are pretty good about that because they want to know. They want to know if their child meets developmental goals and stuff. So here's that process. You refer the child to diagnosis. You would do the assessment. You classify what if they meet those needs. Then you have an IEP meeting, and a parent signature client, then placement, then evaluation teams. Talks about the evaluation process here. When parents believe that their child needs special ed assistance, if a child is identified through Child Find, subsequent evaluations must be provided. First notice that provided to evaluate the child, and often if the parent brings them in and you want to do this, they'll sign, and this is not a big deal. Where this gets a lot tougher, folks, is they're in there a while. Where this gets a lot tougher is, I say, the child's in 3rd grade and it's not making progress, and you want to do this screening, do this initial assessment. Sometimes there's a resistance to it. And I've seen times, even after the assessment, there's some resistance to signing the IEP to put them in special ed services. Why? It's huge, guys. It's huge. It would be devastating in our house to find out our child had a disability, even a learning disability. And it would take a long time for us to get our arms around this. If the child has found this way back in preschool, parents are used to this, and often it's, some of the disabilities are very visible, and parents have to deal with it at an earlier time in a different way. But after they enter school and you think things are going fine, it can be devastating. So that's why this comes. You must provide to evaluate a child and get consent from the parents. No single procedure. No, and again, this is teacher speak. I'm going to ask you to put it in parent speak, but no single thing will be to determine if they're eligible. And for the most part, when we talk about these things, we're talking about just certain disabilities. That whole list, like for example here, visually impairment, we're not going to go on and on about how to determine if they have a disability. Where this comes into play is to determine if they have a learning disability or autism or ADD and ADHD. Then the child must be assessed in all areas of suspected disability because it might be more than one. It's not unusual for a kid. In fact, they're almost married together. Kids with learning disabilities have some attention problems. And vice versa. Kids with attention problems tend to have some learning delays. And then determination of eligibility shall be made by a team of qualified professionals. Remember how I whined about this before? I hate that term. It's not parent speak. And so we can talk about it here in the textbook, but when you're communicating with parents, please find some better words. Children are not eligible if they are an only deciding factor of a limited English proficiency or lack of math or reading instruction. And again, that's very hard to prove. Then this illustrates a special ed cycle, and that is that you do a referral, you do evaluation, determine if they're eligible, then an IEP, then we do this annual review. Remember, at least annually. If not, you can do it more often, but at least annually. You go back here. So we're moving into C. There's part 6. I told you it'd be a long lecture. 97, Part C of 97, 2004. State interventional services are expected to have and this is the Part C is that early childhood thing. And let's see here. You'll be able to find them. Put together that IFSP, the service plan, comprehensive, multidisciplinary evaluation of the infant or toddler, and that's what Part C. This is infants and toddlers, which is 0 to 2. Remember, then there's a 3 to 5 program, and then there's school age. Okay. Family directed. What are the family needs? The needs of each family with an at-risk infant or toddler assisted program. And think of this now. You're going to give birth, or after you give birth, you find out the child is severely disabled. And sometimes, of course, it's obvious, and even in uterine, they can make this determination. But I say it's generally a very big shock for the family, and so they need special care. And often these medical agencies, hospitals and stuff, can make referrals to these agencies. Remember we talked about this, certain agencies vie for those funds. Public awareness programs that focus on early identification and a comprehensive system of personal development for that child. Infant or toddler with a disability means any child under 3 who needs intervention services because their child is at risk of substantial development delays provided by the child. And then it goes into this service plan. Again, this is for preschool age kids. The focus of the program for infants and young children includes present levels of development, and they have baselines of what their development rate should be. I remember my babies, you take them to the doctor and you're looking at height and weight, and they were both, every checkup we had, exactly 50% percentile height and weight, all through those developmental things. And so the sad reality I had to tell them from the time they were babies is, you're average. You're average. Suspect supports and service necessary, describe environment and location, the dates, who the service people are, and steps to be taken that transition to home if they're coming from hospital, community, or the preschool services, which starts at about that age 3 to 5. And that's almost an automatic process, is from this infancy, part C, to preschool for kids with disabilities. So all this in that IFSP. Once a year more is needed, just like on the IEP. Then here's the Head Start program. Community Service Act of '74 was for low-income kids. And this is something, I believe this is on the test even, and that is what percent of kids in Head Start have to be allocated for disabilities. 10%, I believe, is it. And then the coordinator of services of children with disabilities must have a plan for continuing what procedures of screening, making referrals, determining the need of special ed, provisions to ensure accessibility of your facilities. Why is that important? Because we tend to stick these in old buildings, and so they needed provisions for that. Furniture, I remember the one I was involved with had, you know, special equipment and things to play for kids in wheelchairs and stuff. Then transition from early childhood to Head Start, other appropriate preschool things. Then parent-school partnerships. Let me go back to the text here first. This is all that about Part C we talked about is for the early childhood. I've never had so much trouble with this bringing up the pages ever. By child find, we had that in our notes. Identifying the infants and toddlers. And here's the conditions associated with significant delays in development, including chromosome conditions, congenital syndrome, sensory impairments, metabolic disorders, number of things, prenatal or perinatal infections, significant medical problems such as cerebral palsy. I say again, these are often visible right away. Low birth weight, and then postnatal conditions such as early childhood things. Then about the IFSP, we just talked about these 8 things. So these are rights of infants and toddlers, multidisciplinary evaluations, IFSPs, service coordinators, and those are all this. We talked about Head Start. And then over here, this parent-school partnerships, helping young children develop. This is for 3 to 5, and again, for the most part, this does not involve you. What it does involve you is awareness in case you have families coming into your program, because these kids, once they go through this system, they will come to kindergarten on an IEP. They will come to kindergarten and first grade already on an IEP. That's why it's important you know this. Okay. So 3 to 5, attend a developmentally appropriate class, need appropriate nurturing environment, language, movement, creativity, and especially if they don't get this at home. Call or write the NICHE can furnish information about these areas. Then communication with the child. Communication is how children learn their language. They must be given opportunities to practice that skill. Tact matches so the child can understand that language. This is what we say happens in low-income families is children do not develop language. Hard to read if you don't have a repertoire of language. That's why we read to these babies in utero. That's why we read to them when they're little, and they read to them all in those developmental years. It gives them language. And so that's why that's important. Give praise and encouragement to them. And again, this isn't you, but it's how this program's run. Enrichment activities, encourage play, read and talk together, and then I think we're to the next one now. Oh, I don't like this one. This is where what happens, how parents, child at home, what parents can do. That's back here on this one, what parents can do at home. Visit the teacher, set a definite time for the child, monitor progress, promote success, be involved in the classroom. And this may apply to you. How do you to work with if you're especially you're teaching early, preschool or elementary or kindergarten kids. Then this one here. Gives an example here. It's interesting. Suggestions for digital lessons. Make the length of your lessons 5 minutes shorter than the period you want the lesson to last. Arrange the tasks sequentially. Check the order by doing the lessons once yourself. Speak more slowly than normal rate of speech, meaning if you're recording. Include a set of questions at the end of the recorded lessons for immediate review. A few things to remember. Encourage correct responses. Use tests of learning opportunities. Excellent. Communication between professionals and parents of children with disabilities. Where is that one? Huh. Kind of skip over this one. Communication between professionals and parents of children with disability may be confronted with dispirited parents. Yes. Experiencing considerable doubt, confusion, anxiety about their child with disability. And why is that? If you have this in your family, you know it's really a life sentence. That normally developing kids really will come to a point, it'll peak in high school through college where there's a complete separation where they should be able to go out and function now solely as an adult. Some of the kids, especially that start out this young with disabilities, never going to get there, that they'll always be a dependent person. And so you'll work with some pretty despondent parents sometimes of this, and it'll be a challenge. Parents react differently sometimes to unpredictability at birth, diagnosis of a child with a disability. So I'm saying reactions are a result of feelings. Parents may experience frustration, hurt, fear, guilt, disappointment, ambivalence, and despair. Professional to work effectively with parents of children with disabilities, they must be ability to recognize these feelings and willingness to honor them. And this can happen, this process, folks, even if it's later into your program and for the first time they're understanding the child is having some learning needs, they may go through the same thing. Frustration, hurt, fear, guilt, disappointment, ambivalence, or despair. Only now it comes out on you. We may take it out on you as the teacher. So please just have an understanding of this is a process that they could be going through. Denial, projection of blame, fear, guilt, grief, withdrawn. Series of stages, and they compare it to the stages of death. The death of a dream of a child being healthy and normal and going on in their life. Direct communications, and it goes into this, ways to reach parents like a daily log. And that's a little antiquated, of course. For the most part now, parents would use the email or chat, instant messaging. Written logs, there might be some demand for it, but here's what I would do on emails if you're doing it, is make that the daily log, is I would and continue to use the same one, just keep replying so you have a history of what's been communicated, newsletters, letters, things like that. Here's a daily log, and again, I would make this digital. Even low-income families now have access. And so the different forms, and that's a little extreme, and it's maybe necessary. Here's the one to prehensile things, and I'm going to make this I think this is only about number 3. But they ever put a little thing for each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the reason being, again, because if you go through this process with a family for the first time in elementary school, you could easily go through this. And I'm telling you, being the parent of 2 kids, I would have to go through these stages. I would go through these stages. So when we get to this point, and I can't tell you how many times I heard teachers say, oh, they're in denial. Yeah, they are. And with good reason. Because they don't want to move down into these. Please, school, fix my child so that they don't have this life sentence of a learning disability or autism or ADD or ADHD. So it's okay if they're in denial. And I can't tell you how many times that was said in a very derogatory way. They're in denial. That's okay. That's okay. Okay, so you bring those in, the different steps of that process. Ask youth to respond to questions about their school experience. The questions include this: when do you think you were about your years in school, and comes to mind about special ed? What was reluctant to provide special services because of financial concerns? One student responded, I'm a 12-year-old who has been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, post-finishing 6th grade and been ill. Yeah, my page isn't coming up. School. I would like to hear more kids with learning disabilities. And then parents share their feelings. I don't know if we had that over here. Oh, that's for the teachers, those who work with them. That's coming here. Parents share their feelings on things, and a very interesting read. Parents of twin boys with cerebral palsy. Please read this. Very, very interesting. Okay. Yeah, long, lengthy letters here, so please read that. These letters that will help you empathize with what these parents are up against. And again, I would love to see letters more about more common disabilities that you will be working with. Some of these are a little more extreme. One of 110. The 3 has his middle child diagnosed with autism. Again, please read through this. And here's that concerns of those who work with them. And I can't get it to come up. Got it? Burnout's the most common. Loss of concern. Depression and suicide seems a little extreme. More for parents. Please tell me that teachers aren't suicidal over this. But parents, not this. Very heavy for parents, and I said you'll see a number of landmark cases with special ed where the parents are in extreme burnout, looking for some reprise that they come to this. Okay, and this, don't ever forget this, the FERPA is interesting, the FERPA, and this is kind of like the FAPE, Family Education Rights, the right of all parents, but it's especially important for those having children with disabilities. A regional office of civil rights can help filing discrimination complaints. Let me go back to that and see what the text says about it. Written for all citizens, greatly affected record keeping for people with disabilities. In Chapter 12 for a description of a FERPA. And this is it, if you feel like there's some type of discrimination, known the Buckley Amendments. It's just one people involved, but a number of them. and it talks about the Office of Civil Rights and how to work with them. Then working with culturally and linguistically diverse families has some interesting takes here also. Often overrepresented in special ed classes and underrepresented in gifted and talented. I explained this some other time, but I want to just hit it again quickly here. Maybe it gives you this. I want to just tell you what this means again here. If it's overrepresented and underrepresented, represented and gifted. Okay, and overrepresented means this. Let's just say for our school, you know, we have just say 1,000 kids in this school that we're in here. And of that, let's say these culturally and linguistically diverse, meaning they're second language issues, let's say that that represents 10% or 100 students in the school that have some issues with diversity. So we should not see more than 10% of our special ed students being culturally and linguistic diverse. But what we'll find is 20 or 25% of the special ed population may be culturally or linguistically diverse. That would be overrepresentation. And then same way underrepresented would be the other way, that in our gifted program, if 10% of our student body is culturally or linguistically diverse, we should see 10% in this gifted and talented program. And of course, sometimes they're way underserved. The only exception to, of course, is we can't solve, and that is these Asian families tend to be overrepresented in the gifted and talented and very underrepresented in special education, even when they're new citizens, new to this country. Nobody seems to know why, but that's where that comes in. Culturally relevant pedagogy helps teachers guide them through this. And some of the issues facing these families are this, and I'm going to ask you, I think this is number 4, to bring this in from the textbook. It's right here. Economic issues, cultural discriminations, things like that. Okay, trust, pedagogy, put a line here for each of yours on these, and I'll spread those out for you a little bit. Okay, sorry, long chapter, but not much to bring in the notes. But make sure you read this summary too, I think would be very good.